Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Apologies for our late start. One of our panelists is having some difficulty getting in, so I hope that he can join us eventually, but I will be doing some more troubleshooting, I think, along the way if he can't get in. But I want to say welcome and thank you so much for joining us this morning. We are privileged to have faculty members here at PACE who have expertise in this region and on this conflict. And I'm so pleased that we can have this time and this space to talk about what has been such an important conflict that's been dominating the news. And so what I want to do is first, introduce myself, I guess. I'm Professor Kate Fink. I am in the Department of Media, Communications, and Visual Arts here at PACE on the Pleasantville campus. And I'm joined this morning by Jared Manasek, who's an associate professor in the Department of History, and also Assistant Professor Mirjana Pantic, who is in my department, the Department of Media, Communications, and Visual Arts on the Pleasantville campus. And I hope that we soon will be joined by Andrei Danilenko. He's having some trouble getting into the Zoom, but as I said, I'm going to be working with him to hopefully have him join us soon, because I really want us to be able to hear his perspective as well. So just to let you know, our plans for how things are going to go for this session, I thought I would just say a bit to give us kind of an overview of what has happened up until now. And apologies, I'm continuing to look as people are joining the session this morning. So as we probably all know, we had been hearing warnings from our own administration in this country, as well as other countries, that an attack by Russia on Ukraine was imminent, beginning a couple weeks ago. But just over a week ago, on February 24th, Russia invaded Ukraine. As of now, it appears that the Russian military has been making its most significant gains in the southern part of the country, controlling the city of Kherson, surrounding Mariupol, and there have been concerns about the important port city of Odessa in the south. Just within the last 24 hours, if you've been checking the news, a nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine was seized, and there were concerns about a fire there and the potential impact on damage to that nuclear power plant. There have also been attacks on the northern part of the country, of course, Kyiv, the capital, Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine. The response from the US, EU, UK have included economic sanctions, such as freezing the assets of Russia's central bank. Some Russian banks will be removed from the SWIFT messaging system, which results in the delay of the transfer of money. Some wealthy individual Russians have also been sanctioned. The UN General Assembly held an emergency session to reprimand Russia. And of course, the impact reaches far beyond just the two countries of Ukraine and Russia. Over 1 million Ukrainians have fled, mostly to nearby countries to the west, Poland in particular. There's been a broad problem of disinformation, especially within Russia. So you may have seen that new laws are going to lead to punishment or restrictions on independent media operations in Russia if they even describe what's happening as a war or an invasion. And of course, there are global economic impacts due to the interrelatedness of our countries. And of course, more, in a broader sense, we've heard from Putin that he sees this as a battle between East and West, that the invasion of Ukraine is in response to what he sees as an incursion from the West. He's expressed a desire to restore Soviet-era borders, or perhaps even go beyond that. So that's just a little bit to bring us up to date. Of course, there's been much more that's happened, but I want to go ahead and bring in our other experts to share their own perspectives on what's been happening. And so I'm going to first ask Jared Manasek if you wouldn't mind sharing your perspective.
Oh my gosh, putting me on the spot, huh? I'm actually going to solve this first by asking Susan. Do you have a question?
Yes, about Andriy not being able to get in. The link he sent me that I tried to use to log on didn't work. So if maybe someone, I then used the link
I'm on it. I'm on it. I'm
from the event page. That one worked.
Okay.
I sent him the stuff now.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I've sent him a few different ones, so I'm going to continue to try.
Yeah, so I think like the rest of us have been watching this with a mixture of interest and horror, and listening to what has been coming out both from what people have been saying in Moscow and what has been said then also in Minsk and in Kiev. And we see, you know, these competing narratives, especially over what Ukraine is and where Ukraine fits into the world, where it fits into Europe, where it fits into the Russian world, and in particular, these questions of restoration of the Soviet Union, or the old Russian Tsarist Empire, or incorporation into NATO, and this kind of split between East and West that you're seeing in Ukrainian politics even well before this burst of violence, right? This particular conflict that we're in the middle of now seems like it started, what, a week ago? Is that what it is, Kate? How long have we been doing this?
Just over a week.
Just over a week. Seems like it started just over a week ago, but it goes way back, and we can, I mean, you can, you know, go back as far as you want, but it's probably been building now for almost 7 years. It is a result on the one hand of Putin's aspirations, but then it's also that's playing out in the context of a country that ever since its independence from the Soviet Union in the 90s has been split between the way it looks. Sometimes there's many people in Ukraine who look to the West and who see an economic and a political and a cultural future and similarity with Western Europe on the one hand. And then there are also many people, and it's not just the Russian minority in Ukraine, who look to the East and see economic links, they see political links, and they see cultural similarities with Russia. And those divisions really began to kind of appear again in 2013, 2014, thanks to problems at the top with the leadership under the President Viktor Yanukovych, who came into power suggesting that he was going to be facing towards the West, facing towards the EU, and who then at the last minute from negotiations turned back and turned towards Russia and walked away from any sort of engagement with the EU. The result of all of that ended up first being protests, and protests by the many, many Ukrainians who wanted to be more closely affiliated with the European Union. These protests begin to sort of build up and take on a meaning of their own. The end result is that Yanukovych gets flees, and you end up with Ukrainian leadership that is to a great extent nationalist, right? And for a Russian minority, a strong kind of national sentiment within Ukrainian politics can be disturbing. And nationalism is a difficult word to use here because it comes in so many different flavors. And the flavor that you see in Ukrainian politics in the 2010s is for the most part, a sort of a bourgeois nationalism, a nationalism that isn't the kind of nationalism that we think of as like violent and that sort of thing. It's closer more towards a patriotism. But the history of the region is such that any kind of nationalist expression is so weighted and can be so worrisome, particularly if you're a minority in the country that it's being expressed in. And this is one of the sort of the core issues that we see as a tension really coming to the head in the middle of the 2010s. Is this tension between the West and the East on the one hand, and then emerging Ukrainian nationalism and a very important Russian minority within Ukraine, to the deep background side of this.
Thank you so much, Jared. Why don't we go ahead and bring in Mirjana Pantic. Please share your thoughts about what's going on right now.
Okay. Let me just give you a little bit of background about myself. So I'm originally from Serbia, and I was 10 years old when the war in former Yugoslavia started. I was in Serbia during NATO bombing in 1999. So I can really relate to what people in Ukraine are currently going through. And it kind of brought a bit of a PTSD to me, because I know that what's going on right now is going to have an impact on the country and the entire region and Europe for a long period of time. So I feel that every day of war is a year of recovery, because even if I look at Serbia, like even 20 years after NATO bombing ended, we are still recovering from the consequences of the civil war and bombing. Another thing is I worked there as a journalist before moving to the United States for 12 years. And my master's degree is in European Union studies. So most of the time I focused on international issues and on European Union. So for that reason, I will try to just explain this European Union and NATO perspective in my speech to kind of provide the context of what is going on in the region. So we all know that Ukraine is a former Soviet republic, and after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, it became a sovereign country. And as such, with other Eastern European countries, it started having European Union aspirations. And later, the country also expressed interest in joining NATO. Now, Ukraine was not the only country that had such ambitions. Three Baltic countries that were also part of the Soviet Union, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, also declared independence, and they were looking to this more bright future inside the European Union. These countries were economically, politically unstable, and they also had Russian troops until 1995. And after the withdrawal of Russian troops, they decided to apply for NATO membership, and also they started with their European path. And in 2004, they were accepted into the European Union. Another thing to provide like a wider context to what is happening is that European Union that had 15 member states in 1995 started expanding. So in 2004, they received 10 more member states, and that was the biggest enlargement of the European Union in its history. So during this post-Soviet era, not only Baltic countries, but also other countries that belonged to the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War were looking to apply for both European Union membership and NATO membership. Why is this important? All these the majority of these countries that applied to join the European Union and NATO, they used to be members of the Warsaw Pact, which is the organization that was formed in 1955 as counterbalance to NATO. So all these countries that were used to in the same club with Russia were now changing their path, and they wanted to move toward NATO and the European Union. There is one important point that Jared brought up, and that is nationalism and divisions within each of these countries. So there's still population that wants to be closer, to have like closer ties with Russia, and there's population that wants to have closer ties with the West. And that's one of the problems that not these Eastern European countries that are now currently members of the European Union, but countries that have aspiration towards the EU. That's one of the issues related to the European Union and a Western perspective in general. So all these countries were members of the Warsaw Pact, and all of them, except for Albania. Albania is currently just a candidate for the EU membership, and all other countries are both now members of NATO and European Union. So what it means is that during the Cold War, we had this balance of power, but now after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Western Bloc, European Union, NATO, they started expanding towards Russia, and Russia just started losing its economic and political influence in these countries. So it has reduced immensely as they started playing for a different team. So in 2004, this was the biggest enlargement in the European Union history. In 2004, the European Union accepted 10 new member states from Central and Eastern Europe. Many of them were former socialist and communist countries, and they included the Baltic state. Ukraine has also decided to take the same path. So they also decided to apply for NATO membership and also to start working on its integration into the European Union. So they applied for NATO in 2008. Russia was, of course, concerned about the further expansion of NATO. And with Ukraine's aspirations to join the European Union, Russia continued losing its influence in Ukraine. And Putin's position is that the two countries are actually strongly linked. So Jared mentioned one important year in Ukraine's history, and that is 2014, when they signed the association agreement with the European Union. That resulted in further tensions with Russia, which wanted to keep Ukraine under its influence, especially because if we look at the Baltic countries, their population is about 6 million total of these three countries, and then Ukraine is a country of 44 million people. So this agreement, what this agreement actually means. So this agreement means opening the door for further political economic integration. So Ukraine is actually coming closer to the European Union. And it also means lifting trade restrictions such as import duties, tariffs, and so on. I also want to make a distinction between the European Union and NATO. European Union is a political organization, but at its roots, it is first of all an economic organization. So that's why it doesn't have its own military. So for that reason, the countries that want to secure their borders, they not just apply for they don't just apply for the EU membership because they want to see prosperity in their countries economy-wise, but they also want to secure their borders, so which is why they are applying for the NATO membership. As you know that NATO attack on one country, one NATO member, means attack on all other countries. So they want to secure their borders. They want to, for those reasons, they are also applying to join NATO, not just the European Union. So association agreement also means that Ukraine was getting access to the EU funds, and this is important. So they were, with this association agreement, there was this gradual reduction of tariffs, but also Ukraine was getting access to the European Union funds to support its economy and political reforms. And as you know, a few days ago, Ukraine officially applied for the EU membership. And I just want to explain what it means, especially because I saw a lot of enthusiasm in the media. Everyone thinks that Ukraine will join the European Union tomorrow. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. Because this application itself means a stronger determination to become a member of the European Union club. And also it means having more financial and other support from the European Union. But, and even though some think that maybe this conflict will actually push Ukraine faster towards the European Union, my feeling is that it could actually slow the process down. There are, for example, there are countries that could veto this decision, and also a potential decision to speed up this process with Ukraine could cause an outrage among the countries that have lined up like decades ago to become the European Union members. And it's important to remember that the conflict that is going on now is going on European soil, and that Ukraine is not the only problem. So the main problem we're having right now is Ukraine. But I also wanted to remind you of the Balkan countries where I come from. There's always a potential for conflict in those countries, and European Union, with its promises of prosperity, of membership, they were kind of keeping these potential conflicts under control. So they can't allow for any conflicts in that region to escalate, especially because they're promising this European Union future. And these countries have been waiting to join the European Union for decades. Turkey has signed the association agreement that Jared also mentioned. Turkey has signed that decades ago. They've been waiting to become the member of the European Union. Also, the Balkan countries, they started this process, Albania, Serbia, Montenegro, they started this process in early 2000s, and they just have the candidacy, but they're not moving much forward. So I'm saying that at this point, when it comes to the European Union, I believe that the main help, and this is really important, the main help that they can expect is political help. The European Union has stated, we are with you, and that is an important political message. And also they can expect military aid and financial help, also help in negotiations with Russia. We saw that yesterday. French president was talking with Putin for 90 minutes, but not at least not at this point, a deeper interference when the conflict is still happening in Ukraine. Thank you very much. So I'll be happy to discuss this in more detail later.
Yes, thank you so much, Mirjana. And I should mention, I briefly introduced folks at the beginning, but Mirjana has years of background as a journalist reporting on the European Union. So that is, she comes from a well-informed place, in addition to being from Serbia. So I wanted to welcome Andrei Danilenko. We're so glad that he is here. He is.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. He is professor of Russian and Slavic linguistics in the Department of Modern Languages and Cultures, and he is also from Ukraine. So I wanted to give him the floor now to share his perspective on the conflict.
Well, thank you. As a colleague of mine suggested, that what kind of an intervention from other sources that I could not just connect to your link. I'm using another computer. It helped me. So you see, I'm a linguist, and also I'm interested in literary culture, history, and some other disciplines in the humanities which are deeply connected to Ukraine and all East Slavic peoples. So I would like just to share with you my personal vision of what's going on, because I'm not a specialist in political science and I try to avoid discussing different points of view, because at some point you cannot persuade a person with a different opinion and just having 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. It is so strange, and I hope that not a single person from all this audience would at some point understand that war becomes very personal. And we've never went through this. And at some point, some 7 days ago, I realized this war is personal. And every single person who is related to Ukraine definitely has its own war. So I would like just simply to tell you how I perceive this war from my perspective, from my eyes, because I'm not only a native of Ukraine, I also from the city of Kharkiv, which is, as you know, located in the northeastern part of Ukraine. And I also will tell you something about another person who is a student of mine, graduate student of mine, who's right now in Ukraine. If you can allow me to share a couple of clips, which I would like just to give comment on this, and then it would be great. I prepared something.
You should be able to share.
Perfect. Just a second. I'm opening this one. Optimizing the video and sharing everything, sharing with you. This is an audio sharing application. Before I share this with you and give you just a general comment on this, this is what I received basically the day before from my native city, what it looks like, what my native city looks today. Basically, perhaps in a week or so, I will have no city to come back. So I would like just simply to take a look what it looks like today, downtown.
Сумская и на Петровского, сейчас Ярослава Мудрого. Самая большая площадь Европы, город Харьков. Прилет в администрацию. Елочки тут когда-то были, росли. Вот. Было. Ой. Кто-то думает, что это вот электроуниверситет, вот бачите.
I will stop sharing this document and a couple of comments. That's, as you see, the building of university right in the center, that's downtown. The person, by the way, who is speaking and talking, he's using only Russian, because Russian, that's the language which is used in this city. I also want to show you one more clip, if you don't mind, which is even shorter. And I will go back for a moment to this and I will find it and I will be with you. This is just very brief one. Yes, done, and I'm sharing with you. So these are pictures which I received today from my city. This is one of the residential areas, for example, that's from another side of the same building, which is located downtown Kharkiv. And as you understand, there is no military sites, military bases right in the middle of the city. And definitely you can get a general perspective on what is going on in the city. I'm not going into details, what they want to achieve. Basically, everybody can understand what they want to achieve. I always tell my friends, and last week, 7 days ago, I told that I have several members of my family. 2 of them are 80 years old, approximately. They are my aunt and my uncle, who just decided, just resign. Okay, we're staying here. We have nowhere to go. And there is also a family of my cousin, 2 women and 2 kids. He, at some point, yes, sounds very at a loss. He just doesn't know what to do. Either because all these evacuation trains right now, they are packed. People to make to the railway station, they're using subway, going on these tracks, making several miles to get there. Because as you see from these pictures, from these photos of my city, you cannot guarantee that at some point, a ballistic missile or some shelling with this, something will happen at the moment when you cannot accept it and you cannot understand what's going on. It's on the one side of this. That's my personal war, because I don't sleep. I sleep 4 or 5 hours because I call my friends, call my family members 2 or 3 times per day to support them, not only in Kharkiv, but my colleagues, linguists, members of some institutions like the Institute of Ukrainian Language of the National Academy of Sciences or Institute of Linguistics of the National Academy of Sciences. But people are not so much scared as I would expect. In my second small part of my personal war, last year, we had a Fulbright researcher from Ukraine, and I was a host professor who spent 10 months here. She's my PhD student, actually. She left in mid-January, and she left for Kyiv. She has a big family. She has, for example, I would tell you, 3 sisters and 1 brother. Right now, they managed to move from Kyiv, which is the capital, to the western part. But I want to bring your attention what these kids are doing right now. She told me that she has an elder sister who is 27 years old. She volunteered and she's right now in the army and she's in Kyiv. She cannot tell where she is. She just simply confirmed several times per day that I am alive. I didn't know about this. She told me just yesterday. She has a brother who is 28 years old, who also stayed behind in Kyiv, and she also volunteered the first day, but they told me, no, we don't need you. He came the second day and they took him. So this small family, big family, and this graduate student of mine, and this family just simply fantastic. You can understand to what extent they are resilient and they are not just given up. Although they understand that practically nobody would help them. I'm not going into details what can, for example, some other organizations do in this case. I'm just simply giving perspective of my personal war. And I don't know, I'm trying to do something, I'm teaching, my hands are shaking sometimes, especially last week, but I'm doing my job because I am here to work. And I think that I work in here at pace even and talking to my students and trying to explain what's going on from my personal perspective, because that's my personal war. I hope I'm contributing to the ultimate victory of the Ukrainian nation in this war. And this war is for annihilation. It's just simply a genocide toward the Ukrainian people. And I would like to thank you for this wonderful event. And I would like also to bring your attention to our seminar, which we are holding next Monday with a guest speaker who is specialist on this region. Thank you. Would be happy to answer your questions at the end of this meeting.
Thank you so much. And we will make information on that available in the chat. I'll make sure that I add that. But thank you so much. I'm so glad that we have you and all of you here to talk about this. I do want to open this up to questions. I've already received one question directly. Feel free to add questions in the chat. But we have a question from Ronald Isaac. This is, I think this came in while Mirjana was speaking about the political alliances and divisions in Eastern Europe. So the question is, it's my understanding that Serbia supports Russia and Albania and North Macedonia support Ukraine, and that additional tension is of concern. What do you think about that? So Dr. Pontic, I think that question is for you.
Yeah, sure. Well, Serbia, first of all, has this nationalistic government. And even though they are on paper, they're expressing this EU aspirations, it took them 2-3 days to figure out whether they're gonna align with Russia or with Ukraine. So they actually, the statement they produced was not, it wasn't pro-Russia, it was more like a neutral statement, but that of course caused like an outrage in Serbia, because Serbia is like many other Eastern European countries, they're very divided, it is a very divided country. So some people support a deeper relationship with Russia, some people support with deeper relationship with Ukraine, and also I need to remind you that Serbia actually voted in the UN to against aggression of Russia in Ukraine. So it didn't align. It didn't align with Russia, but basically they kind of condemned the violence and aggression. But then on the other hand, like the position that Serbia has in this conflict is neutral. And I just want to remind you that Serbia was also like neutral during the Cold War. So they tried to explain their position that way. But on the other hand, just like other European, other countries that are candidate for EU membership, Serbia is supposed to condemn what Russia has been doing to Ukraine because they have EU aspirations. The reason why I talked a lot about the European Union are these divisions in different countries in their population, because they still, the problem with the European Union and the problem with, this is what I'm afraid of. So I wanted the point of my speech was that I really wonder to what extent can Ukraine rely on the help from the European Union. And I'm afraid that something similar that happened in Serbia could happen in Ukraine later as well. So for instance, in Serbia at the beginning of the EU integration process, people were very enthusiastic about it. And the support of the citizens for Serbia to join the European Union was going over 60%, 70%, but then over time it dropped. And one of the reasons for that is that European Union has not delivered its promises to Serbia. And we were hoping to join in a matter of 10 years, but now this process has been going on for 20 years and we are nowhere near joining the European Union. And there is this fatigue inside the European Union with respect to EU integration process. And I'm afraid that European Union frequently creates problems and errors. And there's this division inside the European Union to what extent it should expand, like how many new members it should accept, because they had some problems with Bulgaria and Romania due to its like high levels of corruption in those countries. And when it comes to Ukraine, even though they sympathize with the conflict that is happening right now, they also think about like what kind of potential problems they could have. And like with Bulgaria and Romania, with all the corruptions, with the corruption happening in those countries, they just decided to prolong accepting other members. And when we talk about Ukraine, they can't at this point, especially because of the conflict, they cannot fulfill any of the criteria to join the European Union. they're a poor country. Political institutions need this major reform. They don't have now, like the countries that are supposed to join the European Union, the countries with clearly defined borders, which is not the case with Ukraine right now. So I'm saying that it is important that the European has demonstrated strong support toward Ukraine. But I think that we are just embellishing the support. I mean, they're not gonna become a member overnight, and they're not gonna receive the support that they need, at least not at this point, while the conflict, as I mentioned, is for now happening only in Ukraine, while it's not expanding over its borders.
Mirjana, I might want to just follow up with you there and point out that, I mean, you touched on it, but one of the big problems that that the European Union has now is exactly the kickback from the last round of real expansion. Even with the first expansion into Poland and Czech Republic and Slovakia and Hungary, there was a lot of tension that was released, or that was caused by that within the core European Union states, and there were a lot of concerns about Poles coming to do the plumbing in Paris and this sort of thing. But the expansion that included Romania and Bulgaria became hugely problematic, as you say, in part because of these questions of corruption, and then also just extreme economic backwardness. But I think also we cannot ignore that there is a certain kind of culturalist aspect to the European Union and European identity as framed by the European Union. As you mentioned earlier, it started out in the aftermath of World War II as an economic union, and exclusively an economic union. But it has expanded over time. It is political, and it is very much something that overlaps a political structure on top of a European cultural state, or a European cultural space, rather. The questions that keep coming in, particularly for people in Western Europe, revolve around, does Romania and does Bulgaria, do they belong to this European cultural space? Does Ukraine belong to this European cultural space? And the answer is that historically, at least, it's very unclear. Even if you go back into like the 17th, 18th century, you have people in the West writing very clearly about how Eastern Europe, sort of beyond Poland, is different. And that difference can be seen economically, it can be seen politically, you can also kind of map it along with the Orthodox Church. That there is something fundamentally different about this space. And so if you say that there is this kind of general European concern over an identity, that too stands in the way of Ukraine ever joining in. I mean, I think Bulgaria has kind of been the proof in the pudding that economic backwardness and possibly even, we can say, Orthodox Christianity stands in the way. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Serbia, for example.
I see, Andre, you've raised your hand, and also Ibride, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name correctly, but you've got your hand up. So Andre, if you want to say a few words, and then we'll take
No, I would like just to give the floor to Ibride. Yes.
Okay.
She was
Yes,
the first.
Yes, seeing those pictures, Andre, it's devastating. I'm absolute. I can't imagine. The word that struck out to me when you spoke, Andre, you used the word, powerful word, annihilation. Why? And from what I've seen on the news in the last few days, from your own pictures, from your personal story, there is a sense that I'm getting is that, in fact, it is one of maybe the purposes of this war is annihilation. So I don't get it. What I'm not understanding is if is it an annihilation of what Jared was talking of a culture? Is it an annihilation of a culture? Is it an annihilation of a people? Is it, I mean, exactly, I mean, right now, the bombs seem to be indiscriminate, or maybe they are very discriminate, but they seem to be attacking civilians. They seem to be attacking schools, hospitals, places of institutions, of political institutions. It seems that they're attacking everything, the infrastructures. But I want to understand what kind of annihilation. And also the other thing, yesterday we heard that they were attacking the nuclear facilities. And so I want to know what kind of annihilation are we talking about? And I want to know if there's what is, why, if you want to conquer this land and if he wants to bring it back to his imperialistic idea of a Russia for 21st century, why would he want to annihilate the people? So is it more the people, the culture, or what is it? Explain it to me, because I need to understand this better, please.
If you don't mind, I would like to kill one bird or two birds with one answer in this case. First of all, thank you very much for using the correct term, because I was slightly surprised when I heard from our highly esteemed colleague using the term conflict. It's not a conflict. And please don't call this, for example, special operation, as Putin keeps calling this. This is a war. And you know this, but I understand that we live in the world of euphemisms. But at some point, when you cross the limit or the border, you will understand that is something different. And I will skip for a moment, Iride, to one short meeting which I had 4 or 5 years ago at one of the prestigious conferences in Europe, talking to my friends from Germany and from the US. At that moment, I heard the following phrase: "Oh, Poland is not yet ready to be this member of the European Union. They just simply not yet lived up to this." I just opened my mouth, and for example, Ronald Frank, with whom we are teaching Slavic civilizations, he can agree with me that we are speaking about Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the greatest power in Europe, holding 11 million people at the time when all religions, all nations were living from the 15th century until the late 17th century, before the partition, for example, of the Kingdom of Poland. That's a Europe. That's the history of Europe. And when they try to persuade and tell me, I represent to some extent Poland because my research connected also with this country, that's the core of Europe. That's some kind of a clash of different points of view. And I would like just to bring your attention to this. Don't forget about the history of Europe. Don't forget who was at the beginnings of this Europe, and still perhaps they are holders of some ideas which definitely are at conflict with some ideas in the West, with Macron or some other people who are trying to persuade Putin. But believe me, not a single expert. They don't understand that no sanctions would help in this case, because the Russians and any Slavic people, they are very resilient. And if they are indoctrinated, they don't care about sanctions. They would even help them to stand against any sanctions. That's what I believe, because I'm from the eastern part of Europe. I'm one of these East Slavs who went through what, for example, West Europe can hardly imagine this case. And this is just simply a couple of words for, I don't understand that perhaps I did not answer fully your question, Iride, but speaking just simply impressions, yes, from what I hear right now.
Thank you so much. Ronald Frank, you have raised your hand. What is your question?
Actually, not as much of a question, maybe also address what Iride said, and since Andre called me out. Anyway, it is very unclear, and I've been reading a lot about this, the actual aims of that, the military aims of this conflict here, where this would lead. Nobody seems to have really an idea of what Putin wants. One thing I can say from personal experience, and spent quite a bit of time in Russia and the Soviet Union, is that Russia as a political entity and Soviet Union as a political entity and Imperial Russia before that has historically been highly suspicious of any form of assertion of national identity that goes beyond the cutesy folkloric type. That, you know, when we talk about cultural autonomy, when we talk about whatever union republics and on their rights and all that other stuff, that's all nice and neat. The idea was, even though historically the Russian Empire had not really pursued a policy of, or a sustained policy of Russification ever, they let people be. But once you're part of the Russian Empire, and my wife is, you know, from a subject population of the Russian Empire, not Russian, you can do your thing up to a point. And in the 20th century, any stirrings of Ukrainian nationalism often came when the Russian Empire was territorially crumbling in some way, shape, or form. After the revolution, during the Second World War, and at times like that. So once again, any sort of nationalism, any sort of national self-determination makes the Russian government very, very nervous. So what is getting annihilated now in Ukraine, so what Putin tries to annihilate is this particular form of national self-determination. He cannot probably really afford to have massive casualties, civilian casualties amongst brother Slavs, you know, who he needs to liberate from neo-Nazis, you know, quotes, quotes, air quotes, air quotes, air quotes. At the same time, tactically, destruction of physical infrastructure, scaring people away, you know, that seems to be the way the war is going. This is, I didn't realize actually myself until I spoke with my brother-in-law in Moscow a couple of days ago over the phone. I had seen traces here and there. The media in Russia have fed the population a steady diet of misinformation about Ukraine that basically portrays Ukraine as in the hands of some sort of cabal of unrequited Bandera-style nationalists and neo-Nazis who use chocolate manufacturers and comedians as their puppets, you know, and put them in as president. And the people in Russia with whom I interact are smart enough to see through that and say, what the pile of chicken shit, technical term, sorry. But at the same time, there's a vast number of people who probably swallow that hook, line, and sinker. And I also hear from friends that the older generation, people our age and older, seem to be much more beholden to, this is what they said on TV, therefore it must be the truth. So there is a serious disconnect, and I am very skeptical that there would ever be a critical mass of people in Russia saying, hell no, we didn't sign up for this, you know, this is wrong. There are some, and we hear about them, but I don't see a great mass movement there. So long story short, this what is happening right now is perhaps the most extreme form of the quelling of any sort of national self-determination that we have seen since probably, I would think, Stalin's time. Okay, when, you know, people got resettled, when people and territories being retaken from Nazi occupation were systematically, cleansed of any sort of nationalistic stirrings, including like partisan brigades that fought against the Nazis, on sort of more national grounds, and then not necessarily Soviet. They had it coming for them also. So that seems to me the rationale behind it. And if anything, if rationale is the right word, but Okay.
Thank you so much for your comments. I think I know that we are already at 12 noon, so I think we should probably move in a direction toward wrapping things up, but maybe with just one question that I'll put out to anyone. I think those of us in the US who maybe don't have direct ties to Ukraine, sometimes it can be easy to be overwhelmed by following the news and feeling a sense of helplessness. So maybe I'll just ask, for people who want to do something but don't really know what they should be doing, what advice might you have for people to do something that can be helpful? Ronald, you raised your hand. Do you have?
I just saw a thing today I'm literally just this morning on Facebook. There is evidently something going around. You can book Airbnbs in Eastern Poland and also Western Ukraine, and the hosts will then use these bookings to host refugees. So and that's somebody evidently put a thing out saying I spend I booked like 5 nights for $14 a night or something like that, and they're going to be and chatting with the host there, and so they're evidently providing them room for refugees. Though I have also heard that our Airbnb already is offering that service, so offering to recompense anybody who takes in refugees for the expense. So that's just one little thing that popped up this morning. But I think if we follow social media, there's quite a few initiatives going around. So always take them with a grain of salt, but generally I think there's a lot of goodwill out there.
Could we maybe have some final thoughts from our panelists about anything remaining that you feel people don't know enough about when it comes to understanding the war?
So from my side, I think we've touched on a lot of things that I think are probably the most important ones. In terms of this question of annihilation earlier, I would just say that I don't think it necessarily had to be that way. I don't think Putin set out trying to annihilate the Ukrainian people. I don't think he really thought that he would have a war such as this on his hands. That said, this is what he's got now. And if you want to get a perspective on what might come out of this, you might want to look for pictures online for Grozny, which was the capital of Chechnya. It's pretty clear that the Russian military is willing to use all tools at its disposal when it comes to military tactics in order to achieve its end. I do not see personally a reason that that Russian leadership would stop or respond to any kind of sanctions whatsoever. The only way, if you want to come up with a military solution for this, the really truly only way will be either for NATO involvement or for an ongoing supply of weapons and support to Ukraine in the hopes that somehow they will be able to defeat this much, much larger and better organized army. So the annihilation that is taking place, the destruction block by city block of entire towns, the surrounding of towns and cutting off power, cutting off water, siege tactics, that I don't see any way that that won't continue. It's easy for us to talk about Putin being not a rational actor. And for a long time, at the beginning of this, I kind of was thinking that as well. But the thing that's become more and more clear is that he is a rational actor. He's a very rational actor. And the rationale on his part, I believe at this point, is it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. So I think when you talk about what we can do, the response side the responding to the outcome of the violence, that is doing humanitarian activities, this sort of thing, is I think really, really fundamentally important. Calls for example, a no-fly zone. Political activism, I think, is probably not going to be as successful, and I don't think we should ever expect the United States or NATO to put in something like a no-fly zone. It would be a disaster. Our options as people who are not involved in policy are limited, and I think they're really restricted to being able to provide as much food, comfort, shelter to the people who are having their lives and their families taken away from them. So,
thanks, Jared. Mariana, how about some final thoughts from you?
Actually, I agree with everything that Jared shared. So I also don't see Putin stop, like at least not at this point. My main concern is also the consequences of this war on Ukraine, because the country will take decades to recover after the country is going through right now. And also it will put a lot of pressure on other European countries. Europe has faced waves of refugees from Syria and other Middle Eastern countries, and now we have like a new wave of refugees from Ukraine, and already like post-COVID, Europe is going through some form of economic crisis, so it will put more pressure on it. And I think that many people, and this is to me the saddest thing, many people who are now refugees from Ukraine, I'm afraid will not be able to go back to the country for who knows how long, if they ever return. So they will just find safe shelter abroad and stay there. So they didn't want to leave the country, but they're now pressed to leave the country. It's different. I emigrated voluntarily, but these people are leaving because they have to, and that is very painful. Another thing is, I just also wanted to reflect on the previous question that you asked about help, like how can people help? I would definitely suggest to look at different organizations that collect help for for Ukrainian refugees. And I would suggest focusing on that. And one really important thing, as I'm actually seeing things from this perspective now, like again, when my country was bombed 20 years ago, I was there, and there was this horrible image created, even though we were against the government, because of which our country was bombed. Like there were people living in that country who were against the government, but they were still suffering consequences of bombing. So just keep in mind that not everything that you will read in the media clearly portrays the picture. Another problem is with social media. There's so many fake news circulating online. So keep in mind that Western media tend to be extremely biased when portraying what's happening abroad. So I don't want, like many Russians are suffering because of the decisions of their president. And I would not like to see any prejudice here building against one nation, because not the entire nation is supporting Putin. And you also need to understand like the circumstances under which people simply receive news story from government control media. And it is difficult to them to understand the situation. So I also want you, from this perspective, to not only focus on our media, but to also try to consume news from multiple sources, especially European media, to understand what is really going on and to be suspicious over all the information that is circulating on social media, because I feel that there has been more fake news coming from circulating online about this conflict in Ukraine than during the pandemic that we've seen in the past 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. It certainly is a problem, and I 100% echo your recommendations to consult multiple media sources before reaching fast conclusions. And thank you to those of you who've chimed in the chat with some ideas about ways to give humanitarian aid, et cetera, and your other comments. Andrei, I want to hand it over to you for some final comments.
Just a couple of minutes. I understand that we are running out of time. My perception is the same, which I have been for years. So basically, to understand Russians, it's difficult. And I told you at some point that all the sanctions wouldn't work, because that's a very resilient East Slavic nation. Ukrainians are part of this East Slavdom, so to speak, as well as Belarusians, whose 40% of towns and villages were burned during World War II. You have to understand that we have to remember that values doesn't, how we assess this situation, it might not work in the case of this war. And I just know that less than 1% of the Russian people support, for example, Ukraine in this case. And when we say that we cannot blame the whole nation and so on, I would tell you the following. For example, the British Association of Slavonic Studies, our American Association of Slavic Studies, when they issued statements to support Ukraine, do you know what they wrote in the statements? We support the people of Russia and Ukraine. When I saw this word order and sequence of nations, I can guarantee you that the perception of what's going on, and this is war, this is not a civil war. Please remember, that's already a war between two different countries. And that's somewhat, it seems to me, changing the situation. And I told Ron knows about, I have a handful of Russian friends. Personally, individually, I support them. But I cannot support the elite of the Russian Empire through the 17th century, through Soviet Union, and right now, who were incapable to create a regime which would support Ukraine before the war. That's the point. The elite did not live up to the standards which we want to have them. There is no elite in Russia which is capable of changing, for example, the war or something else in this country. So I just simply would like just again to remind you that some our cliches, our paradigms, they might not work in this case to some extent. But I wish that Ukraine, and I'm sure that Ukraine will survive. She survived over the last 350 years, so she will do this again. Thank you.
Thank you for ending on as optimistic a note as maybe we can hope for when talking about this. And I wanted to just wrap up by thanking everyone for coming. Thank you to our panelists. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are so fortunate here at PACE to have faculty with such expert knowledge and for being willing and available to share your knowledge, your expertise with all of us to help us understand the war. So, and I also wanted to say thank you so much to the Department of Student Affairs, in particular Dean for Students, Rachel Carpenter, whose idea it was to bring together this panel and to have this event, and to Vinnie Birkenmeyer in residential life, who was here helping with the logistics of this event. So once again, thank you to everyone for joining us.
Sure.
And be safe and well this weekend.
Thank you.